Have you ever wondered why the relationship with your adult children seems so complicated? Why the daughter who once shared everything now seems distant? Or why your attempts to connect are met with polite detachment? Perhaps you've noticed how conversations that once flowed naturally now feel stilted and carefully curated, leaving you wondering what happened to the closeness you once shared. The truth is, the relationship between aging parents and their adult children is one of the most complex emotional territories we navigate in our later years. It's filled with unspoken expectations, shifting roles, and emotional patterns established decades ago that continue to play out in ways neither side fully recognizes or understands. As we age, most of us deeply desire to maintain meaningful connections with our children, yet many find themselves feeling increasingly isolated, misunderstood, or even resented without understanding why. What's particularly painful is how this distance often grows despite everyone's best intentions and genuine love for one another. Today, we'll explore 9 psychological reasons why adult children sometimes struggle to fully value their aging mothers. Insights that can transform how you understand and navigate these precious relationships. By recognizing these patterns, you'll gain the perspective needed to create more fulfilling connections, even if you've felt that distance growing for years. These insights come not from theory alone, but from thousands of hours working with families just like yours, helping them bridge the gaps of understanding that naturally form between generations. And if you find this perspective helpful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more wisdom on navigating life's later chapters with grace. To illustrate these principles, I want to share a story that captures the essence of this journey. As a family psychologist who has spent over 30 years working with intergenerational relationships, I've seen countless variations of this dynamic, but the Wilson family's experience stands out for how clearly it demonstrates the patterns we'll discuss today. I remember the first time they gathered in my office at the community center where I lead weekly support groups. The tension was palpable as Avery Wilson, a polished marketing executive in her mid-30s, sat across from her mother Claire, her posture rigid with a mixture of duty and discomfort. Claire, a vibrant 70-year-old with expressive hands that rarely stayed still, kept glancing at her daughter with a look of bewilderment and hurt. Between them sat Nathan, Claire's husband and Avery's father, his eyes moving between his wife and daughter with the practiced vigilance of someone long accustomed to playing mediator. "I just don't understand," Claire said, breaking the silence. "We used to be so close. Now I feel like I'm imposing if I call more than once a week my own daughter." She looked down at her hands, twisting the simple gold band she wore beside her wedding ring. "Sometimes I think she's forgotten everything I've done for her." Avery exhaled sharply, a sound containing equal parts frustration and restraint. "Mom, that's not fair. I'm trying to balance everything. My job, the kids, helping you with your appointments. I'm doing the best I can. But it's never enough. For you, your brother manages to stop by twice a week," Claire replied, the undercurrent of comparison hanging in the air between them. On the tablet propped on the coffee table, Zach Wilson's face appeared in a video call, his expression more relaxed than his sister's, though his eyes reflected concern. "That's different, Mom," Zach interjected. "I live 10 minutes away. Avery's across town and has a completely different schedule." Despite defending his sister, there was an ease to how Zach addressed his mother that contrasted sharply with Avery's tension. "I've seen this exact dynamic countless times. The different relationships siblings often have with their aging parents, the comparisons that inevitably arise, and the deep currents of love entangled with decades of complicated history. What makes the Wilson family's journey so valuable is how it illuminates patterns that exist in thousands of families, likely including your own. In my years of practice, I've identified 9 key psychological patterns that create distance between aging mothers and their adult children. Understanding these dynamics can be the first step toward healing relationships that may have grown strained over time. Let me walk you through the first several of these patterns as they played out with the Wilson family. The first, psychological pattern I've observed is what I call the digital divide generation gap. This goes far beyond simply preferring different technologies. It represents fundamentally different communication cultures that create constant friction. For Claire Wilson, a lengthy phone call was the gold standard of connection. She would set aside time, settle into her favorite chair, and prepare for what she considered meaningful conversation. When Avery didn't answer or cut these calls short, Claire interpreted this as rejection. "I don't understand why she can't talk for more than 5 minutes," Claire explained during one of our sessions. "When I was her age, I called my mother every Sunday without fail. We'd talk for an hour at least." Across from her, Avery's frustration was evident. "Mom, I text you almost daily. I send photos of the kids. I update you on what's happening. Why isn't that enough?" This wasn't simply a matter of preference. These different communication styles created a cycle of hurt feelings and misunderstandings. Claire's attempts to connect through her preferred medium felt intrusive to Avery, especially when those calls came during her workday. Meanwhile, Avery's quick texts and occasional photos felt impersonal and insufficient to Claire, who craved the sound of her daughter's voice and the intimacy of real-time conversation. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult week when Claire called Avery 6 times during an important client presentation. Avery, embarrassed by the interruption and worried something was wrong, stepped out only to discover her mother wanted to discuss a television show they both watched. In her frustration, Avery silenced her mother's calls, an action that, when Claire discovered it, felt like the ultimate rejection. "She blocked me," Claire said, tears welling in her eyes during our next session. "My own daughter blocked my calls." "I didn't block you, Mom," Avery corrected, the weariness in her voice, revealing how many times they'd had this conversation. "I silenced the notifications during work hours. There's a difference." But to Claire, there wasn't a difference. In her communication culture, being available for phone calls was a basic expression of love and respect. What Avery saw as a reasonable boundary, Claire experienced as emotional abandonment. This pattern is common across generations. The communication methods we grow up with shape our expectations of what constitutes meaningful connection. For those in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, the phone call or in-person visit often remains the real way to connect, while text messages or social media interactions feel like poor substitutes. Understanding this isn't about convincing either generation to abandon their preferences, but rather about recognizing that different methods of staying in touch carry different emotional weight. The second pattern I've observed relates to unresolved trauma resurfacing in caregiving relationships. This dynamic is particularly insidious because it operates largely beneath conscious awareness, triggered when adult children begin taking on more supportive roles with aging parents. With the Wilsons, this emerged clearly when Claire needed help managing her medical appointments. What should have been straightforward assistance became emotionally charged for both mother and daughter. During a private session, Avery revealed the deeper issue. "Every time I try to help her, I become 15. Again," she confessed. All those feelings come rushing back, never being good enough, having to be perfect to earn her approval. She described how her mother's tendency toward perfectionism had shaped her childhood. If I got an A, she'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If my room was clean, she'd point out the one thing I missed. When I spoke with Claire separately, she had a completely different perspective. "I always pushed her because I saw her potential," she explained. "Everything came so easily to her. I didn't want her to coast through life without developing discipline." Neither was fully wrong in their perception, but the childhood dynamic had created wounds that remained unhealed. Now, decades later, when Avery helped Claire organize her medication or accompanied her to doctor's appointments, those old patterns resurfaced. Claire's innocent suggestions about how Avery might better manage the scheduling felt to Avery like the same criticism she'd experienced as a teenager. Meanwhile, Avery's efficient, sometimes brusque approach to helping her mother triggered Claire's fears that her daughter was helping out of obligation rather than love. During one particularly revealing session, Nathan provided insight into how long this pattern had existed. "It's like watching the same play I've seen for 30 years, he said, looking between his wife and daughter. Claire tries to help, Avery feels criticized, Avery withdraws, and Claire feels rejected. Then they both look to me to fix it." This pattern illustrates how the caregiving relationship can reactivate old family dynamics. The adult child who begins helping an aging parent isn't just dealing with current needs. They're navigating through layers of emotional history. Simple interactions become complicated by unresolved feelings from childhood and adolescence. The parent, meanwhile, may be completely unaware of how their past parenting style continues to influence their adult relationship with their child. For the third pattern, I invited my colleague Brooke Hayes to join us. Brooke specializes in cross-cultural and intergenerational dynamics, and she helped illuminate what I call cultural shift in filial responsibility expectations. What we're seeing, Brooke explained to the Wilson family, is essentially a collision between two different cultural worldviews regarding elder care, even within the same family. She turned to Claire. "You grew up in a time when caring for aging parents was considered a fundamental duty, non-negotiable. Your generation often witnessed your own parents caring for grandparents, perhaps even in multi-generational households." Claire nodded emphatically. "That's exactly right. My mother cared for my grandmother until the day she died. It wasn't even a question." Brooke then addressed Avery. "But you came of age in a culture that increasingly views elder care as one responsibility among many competing priorities: career, children, self-care, and broader community involvement. Neither view is wrong, but they create fundamentally different expectations." This cultural shift explained much of the tension between Claire and Avery. When Claire needed more support, she interpreted Avery's careful boundaries as a moral failing, a sign that her daughter lacked the proper values regarding family obligation. Avery, meanwhile, felt that her mother's expectations were unrealistic given the multiple demands on her time and energy. "Mom expects me to drop everything whenever she calls," Avery explained. "My boss doesn't care that my mother needs help rearranging her furniture. My kids don't stop needing me because Mom has a doctor's appointment." "When I needed my mother," Claire countered, "I was there, period. I didn't make excuses about being too busy." What neither fully recognized was how dramatically societal expectations had shifted between their generations. Claire had grown up seeing caretaking as a primary value, while Avery had been raised in a culture that increasingly emphasized individual fulfillment and self-actualization. The conflict wasn't simply personal, it reflected broader societal changes in how filial responsibility is understood and practiced. The fourth pattern I've identified is role reversal anxiety, which manifests when parents begin needing assistance with tasks they once performed independently. This anxiety affects both generations, often in ways that create mutual misunderstanding. This emerged clearly with the Wilsons after Claire made several errors managing her household bills. Nathan had always handled their finances, but when he was briefly hospitalized with pneumonia, Claire took over. Several bills went unpaid, and when Avery discovered this, she immediately stepped in, perhaps too forcefully. "I set up automatic payments for everything," Avery explained during our session. "I created a spreadsheet to track their expenses. I even started getting duplicate statements sent to my email." Claire sat stiffly beside her. "She took over completely, like I'm incompetent." I made one mistake, and suddenly I can't be trusted to manage anything. It wasn't one mistake, Mom, Avery countered. The electricity was about to be shut off. 3 credit card payments were late. This isn't about trust. It's about making sure you're okay. This interaction perfectly illuminated the anxiety both were experiencing. For Claire, accepting help with finances represented a frightening step toward dependency. Each task she relinquished felt like surrendering a piece of her adult identity. Her resistance wasn't about the help itself, but about what accepting that help symbolized. The beginning of a decline she wasn't ready to acknowledge. For Avery, discovering her mother's difficulty with bills triggered fears about what other problems might be developing unnoticed. Her somewhat controlling approach wasn't about doubting her mother's capabilities. It was an attempt to manage her own anxiety about her parents' vulnerability. I just keep thinking, if they can't manage the bills, what else is slipping? Avery confessed in a private session. Are they eating properly? Is Mom taking her medication? Is the house safe? It keeps me up at night. This role reversal creates profound discomfort on both sides. The parent who begins needing help often feels infantilized and may resist assistance even when it's clearly needed. The adult child providing that help may oscillate between not doing enough and taking over completely, rarely finding the balanced middle ground that preserves the parent's dignity while ensuring their needs are met. With Nathan's help, we worked on finding that balance. Claire doesn't need Avery to take over, he pointed out. She needs Avery to back her up, to be there if something falls through the cracks, not to assume she can't handle anything. This distinction between taking over and backing up became crucial in helping the Wilsons navigate this transition. It allowed Claire to maintain her sense of competence while giving Avery the reassurance that serious problems wouldn't develop unnoticed. The fifth pattern that creates distance between aging mothers and their adult children is what I call competing life demands in the sandwich generation. This particularly affects adult children in their 40s and 50s who find themselves simultaneously caring for aging parents and supporting their own children, all while managing careers and other responsibilities. This pressure became evident when Avery broke down during one of our private sessions. I feel like I'm being torn apart, she admitted, her composure crumbling. Mom needs me to take her to appointments. My daughter needs help with college applications. My son is struggling with math. My team at work relies on me. And somewhere, in all of this, I'm supposed to find time for my marriage and my own health. She described a week where she had taken her mother to 3 different medical appointments, helped her teenage son prepare for a math test, stayed late at work to complete a major presentation, and still faced criticism from Claire for missing a family dinner. The worst part is the guilt, Avery continued. No matter what I choose, I'm letting someone down. When I'm with Mom, I'm worrying about work. When I'm at work, I'm feeling guilty about not calling her. When I'm with my kids, I feel guilty about all of it. This sandwich generation pressure creates a particular kind of resentment. The adult child loves their aging parent deeply, but may begin to resent the parent's expectations or needs, simply because there are no more hours in the day to meet all competing demands. The aging parent, meanwhile, may feel deprioritized, unable to see the full scope of pressures their child is navigating. During a joint session, I asked Claire to describe what she saw in her daughter's life. She's busy, I know that, Claire acknowledged. She has an important job. She has her children, but family should come first. My mother always made time for me no matter what. What Claire couldn't see was how dramatically the landscape of demands had changed across generations. Her mother had likely been a homemaker without professional obligations. Avery, by contrast, was managing a career in a hyper-connected world where work rarely stays contained within traditional hours. The expectations for involved parenting had also intensified significantly, with Avery's generation expected to be far more engaged in their children's education and activities than previous generations. Zach, joining by video, offered a perspective that helped bridge this understanding gap. Mom, remember how overwhelmed you felt caring for Grandma while we were teenagers? Imagine if you'd been working full-time then too. That's what Avery's trying to juggle. This comparison helped Claire begin to see the situation differently. The demands weren't just about time management. They represented genuinely competing values and obligations, all legitimate, all important, and all impossible to fully satisfy simultaneously. The sandwich generation's struggle isn't about prioritizing what matters most. It's about making impossible choices between people and responsibilities that all matter deeply. Recognizing this reality helps aging parents understand that an adult child's limited availability isn't about lack of love, but about the genuine constraints of modern life. This leads us to the sixth pattern I've observed: the impact of geographic distance on emotional connection. Physical proximity profoundly shapes how relationships between aging parents and adult children evolve, often in ways neither party fully recognizes. The contrast between Avery and Zach's relationships with their mother illustrated this dynamic perfectly. Zach lived just 10 minutes from his parents' home, allowing him to stop by briefly and frequently, dropping off groceries, helping with small home repairs, or simply sharing a quick cup of coffee. These interactions had a casual, low-pressure quality. If one visit was brief or conversation remained superficial, it didn't matter much because another opportunity would soon arise. Avery, living across town with a 45-minute commute between them, couldn't maintain this rhythm of frequent casual contact. Her visits became less spontaneous, more scheduled, and paradoxically, weighted with greater expectations precisely because they were less frequent. When Zach stops by, it's no big deal if he only stays 15 minutes, Claire explained. But when Avery comes over, I expect more. I've been looking forward to it all week. Then she's checking her watch the whole time, and I feel like an obligation she's trying to get through. From Avery's perspective, the dynamic was equally frustrating. I block out 3 hours to visit, fight through traffic to get there, and then Mom spends the first 30 minutes telling me I don't visit enough. By the time we get past that, I'm already feeling defensive and watching the clock because I have to pick up the kids. What neither fully appreciated was how proximity itself reshapes relationship patterns. Zach's frequent brief interactions created a comfortable, ongoing connection that didn't require each visit to carry emotional significance. The physical distance between Avery and her mother, by contrast, transformed each visit into an event, laden with expectations on both sides, expectations that were almost inevitably disappointed. If you're navigating a relationship with an adult child who lives at a distance, consider how geography might be shaping your interactions. Could you be placing too much emotional weight on occasional visits? Are there ways to create more frequent, lighter connections that don't require physical presence? Understanding this dynamic can help transform your expectations in ways that reduce disappointment on both sides. If you're finding these insights helpful for understanding your own family relationships, I'd love to hear about your experiences. Subscribe to our channel to join our community and share your story in the comments below. The seventh psychological pattern I've observed is what I call differing memories and perceptions of shared history. This may be one of the most profound disconnects between generations, as it reveals how the same family experiences can create entirely different realities for parents and their children. This became strikingly clear during a session where I asked Claire and Avery to each describe Avery's high school years. The contrast in their recollections was remarkable. I gave up everything for my children during those years, Claire began, emotion evident in her voice. I quit my job to be more available. I drove Avery to every debate tournament, sometimes 3 hours each way. I stayed up late helping her, Prepare. I was completely dedicated to her success. Avery listened with visible confusion before offering her perspective. Mom was physically present, yes, but emotionally, I remember those debate tournaments differently. She'd drive me but spend the whole time critiquing my performance, telling me I could have done better even when I won. What I needed was emotional support, not just logistics. Nathan, who had remained quiet during this exchange, offered a third perspective that illuminated the disconnect. You were both right, in a way, he said carefully. Claire, you did sacrifice a lot and were incredibly dedicated. And Avery, your mother's anxiety about your performance often came across as criticism rather than the support she intended. This exchange revealed how powerfully perception shapes memory. Claire genuinely remembered herself as the consummate supportive mother, focusing on her sacrifices and dedication. Avery's memories centered on the emotional quality of their interactions, rather than the practical support her mother provided. Neither was fabricating their version of history. They had simply experienced and therefore remembered the same events through entirely different emotional filters. This pattern of differing memories creates particular challenges when adult children and their aging parents try to discuss their shared past. The parent may feel unappreciated when their sacrifices go unacknowledged, while the adult child may feel invalidated when their emotional experience is dismissed. These competing narratives about the past make it difficult to build understanding. In the present, it's as if we lived in completely different families, Avery remarked during one session. When Mom talks about what a close, supportive family we were, I sometimes wonder if she's remembering someone else's life. This disconnect doesn't mean either party is deliberately distorting the truth. Rather, it reflects how memory itself works, selectively preserving experiences that confirm our existing beliefs and emotional needs. For Claire, remembering herself as the perfectly supportive mother maintained her self-image and sense of purpose. For Avery, remembering the emotional gaps in that support helped explain her ongoing feelings of inadequacy and anxiety. Healing this pattern requires both generations to develop what psychologists call narrative flexibility, the ability to acknowledge that multiple versions of the past can coexist, each valid from its own perspective. When Claire began to acknowledge that her intentions didn't always align with Avery's experience, that she could have been both dedicated and sometimes emotionally unavailable, a new space opened for genuine understanding. The eighth pattern I've identified involves the influence of spouse relationships on maternal bonds. Our relationships with our parents are never isolated from other family dynamics, particularly the relationship between our parents themselves and our own married relationships. This became evident when examining how differently Avery and Zach related to their mother. Nathan's supportive, affectionate relationship with Claire created a family atmosphere where maternal connection was valued. By contrast, Avery's husband Rob had a strained, distant relationship with his own mother, a pattern that subtly influenced Avery's expectations about what mother-child relationships should look like in adulthood. Rob talks to his mother maybe once a month, and that's considered normal in his family, Avery explained. So when my mom wants to talk several times a week, it feels excessive to him. He doesn't understand why I feel guilty saying no to her. Meanwhile, Zach's wife came from a culture with strong traditions of filial piety and multi-generational living. Her close relationship with her own mother modeled and reinforced Zach's connection with Claire. During one revealing session, I asked Avery about her husband's reaction when she spent time with her mother. Her response was telling. He tries to be supportive, but I can tell he thinks Mom is too demanding. Sometimes after I've spent the day with her, he'll make comments like, "I hope you set some boundaries," or "Did she guilt trip you again?" These spousal influences operate largely beneath conscious awareness, yet they powerfully shape our family relationships. When a spouse views an aging parent-in-law's needs or requests as excessive or intrusive, it creates an additional layer of tension for the adult child caught between competing loyalties. For Claire, understanding this dynamic helped reduce her tendency to take Avery's boundaries personally. "I never considered how Rob's family patterns might be affecting our relationship," she admitted. "I was just feeling rejected, without seeing the bigger picture." This pattern reminds us that family relationships never exist in isolation. The attitudes, expectations, and modeling provided by spouses inevitably influence how adult children relate to their aging parents. Recognizing these influences can help both generations navigate differences with greater understanding and less personal hurt. The ninth and final pattern I've observed involves financial stress and resource allocation conflicts. When conversations between aging parents and adult children begin touching on money matters, retirement savings, inheritance plans, potential care needs, the relationship often shifts from emotional to transactional in ways that create new tensions. This emerged in the Wilson family when Claire and Nathan began discussing their long-term care plans. Their modest retirement savings wouldn't cover extended nursing home care if needed, raising questions about how future care needs might be met. These discussions quickly revealed different assumptions among family members. "We always assumed we'd live with one of the kids if we needed care," Claire explained during a family session. "That's what I did for my mother in her final years." Avery's discomfort was immediately visible. "Mum, our house barely fits us and the kids. We don't have a first-floor bedroom, and both Rob and I work full-time. We couldn't provide the kind of care you might need." Zach, though more open to the possibility, raised his own concerns. "We have more space, but Melissa and I have been talking about relocating for her job. We can't make promises about where we'll be living in 10 years. These conversations transformed family dynamics in subtle but profound ways. Suddenly, expressions of love and care became entangled with practical considerations about money, space, and life choices. Claire interpreted her children's practical concerns as lack of devotion, while Avery and Zach felt unfairly judged for having different life circumstances than previous generations. "It feels like we're being asked to choose between our own family's needs and our parents'," Avery explained in a private session. "And no matter what we say, it's interpreted as not caring enough." Adding further complication were discussions about inheritance. Though Claire and Nathan had modest assets, tensions arose when they mentioned possibly selling the family home, a property both children had emotional attachments to, but neither could afford to maintain. These financial discussions often trigger deep-seated feelings about fairness, obligation, and the material expressions of love. What begins as practical planning easily slides into painful emotional territory, with aging parents feeling devalued when their children can't or won't make the financial sacrifices they themselves made for previous generations. Healing this pattern requires separating financial realities from expressions of love and commitment. When families can acknowledge that different generations face different economic landscapes, housing costs, career demands, geographic mobility, they can begin exploring care solutions that honor both the aging parents' needs and the real constraints of adult children's lives. Throughout our work with the Wilson family, I emphasize that understanding these patterns isn't about assigning blame, but about creating opportunities for healing. These dynamics emerge naturally across generations, shaped by cultural changes, personal psychology, and family history. Recognizing them allows both aging parents and adult children to respond with greater consciousness rather than simply reacting from emotional triggers. The breakthrough moment for the Wilsons came gradually rather than suddenly. During one particularly meaningful session, Claire was able to acknowledge something important. I think I've been so focused on what I need from Avery that I haven't really seen what she's juggling. When I was her age, life wasn't this complicated. Avery, in turn, recognized her mother's deeper fear. This isn't really about phone calls or visits, is it, Mom? You're afraid of becoming irrelevant in my life, of not mattering anymore. Claire's eyes filled with tears. When you have children, your whole identity becomes wrapped up in being needed. And then one day, they don't need you anymore. It's disorienting. This exchange didn't resolve all their tensions, but it opened a path toward mutual understanding. Claire began to see that Avery's boundaries weren't rejection, but necessary self-care in a complex life. Avery began to understand that her mother's sometimes demanding behavior came from fear rather than a desire to control. Most importantly, they began developing what I call bilateral empathy, the ability to simultaneously hold awareness of their own needs and the other person's experience. This capacity doesn't eliminate conflict, but it transforms its nature from defensive reaction to conscious navigation. In my work with families, I've found that these 9 patterns appear with remarkable consistency across different backgrounds, cultures, and circumstances. The specific expressions vary, but the underlying psychological dynamics remain similar. What changes outcomes isn't whether these patterns exist, but whether both generations can develop consciousness about them. For aging mothers, this consciousness involves recognizing how profoundly the world has changed between generations. The cultural expectations, economic realities, and social structures that shape their own experiences of family life have transformed dramatically. Adult children aren't simply making different choices, they're navigating an entirely different landscape. I encouraged Claire to consider this perspective. Your mother raised children in an era when women rarely worked outside the home. Extended families often lived nearby, and elder care was considered women's responsibility. Avery is raising her children while managing a demanding career, with no relatives nearby to help, in a culture that expects her to excel in multiple roles. Simultaneously, the differences in your lives aren't just about personal choices, they reflect profound social changes. For adult children, developing consciousness often means recognizing how aging affects their parents' emotional needs and fears. What might seem like neediness, controlling behavior, or outdated expectations often masks deeper anxieties about relevance, identity, and mortality. I helped Avery see that her mother's frequent calls weren't simply demands for attention, but attempts to maintain connection in the face of growing awareness of her own aging. For your mother, I explained, these calls aren't just about chatting, they're about reassuring herself that she still has a meaningful place in your life as her other roles diminish. As the Wilson family continued their therapy journey, both generations began making small but significant shifts in how they communicated. Claire started sending brief texts instead of always expecting phone calls, acknowledging Avery's preferred communication style. Avery began setting aside 1 uninterrupted hour each week for a call with her mother, creating a predictable connection they both could count on. Nathan and Zach played important supporting roles in this progress. Nathan would gently redirect Claire when she slipped into old patterns of criticism or comparison. Zach made a point of acknowledging Avery's contributions to their parents' care, reducing her sense of being unfavorably compared to her brother. These changes didn't transform their relationship overnight, but they created a new trajectory, one based on growing understanding rather than accumulated resentment. The Wilson family discovered that even long-established patterns can shift when approached with compassion and awareness. What makes this journey so important is that the relationship between aging parents and adult children represents one of life's most profound opportunities for healing and growth. When we can move beyond reactive patterns to genuine understanding, these relationships become not just obligations to maintain, but sources of meaning and connection that enrich both generations. For aging mothers, the later years offer a unique opportunity to know their adult children in new ways, not just as extensions of themselves or recipients of their care, but as fully realized individuals with their own wisdom and perspectives. For adult children, maintaining connection with aging parents provides a chance to resolve old wounds, gather family wisdom, and experience the full circle of giving and receiving care that defines the human journey. The Wilson family story illustrates that this journey is rarely simple or straightforward. It involves navigating through layers of history, emotion, and changing life circumstances. Yet even small movements toward greater understanding can transform the quality of these essential relationships. In my final session with the complete Wilson family, Claire said something that captured the essence of this transformation. I'm learning that loving my adult children means seeing them as they actually are, not as I imagined they would be. And that seeing, really seeing, is itself a form of love. Avery, who had always been more reserved with her emotions, reached across and took her mother's hand. And I'm learning that my mother is a person with her own fears and needs, not just a role in my life that changes everything. This mutual recognition, seeing each other as full, complex human beings rather than simply as roles or sources of fulfillment, represents the heart of healing between generations. It doesn't eliminate all conflicts or erase the real challenges of navigating changing needs and relationships, but it creates a foundation of understanding from which these challenges can be approached with grace rather than resentment. If you've recognized some of these patterns in your own family relationships, please take a moment to like this video. It helps others find this important information as they navigate their own family dynamics. As I conclude our time with the Wilson family, I want to share where they are today. 6 months after our intensive work together, they've established new patterns of connection that honor both generations' needs. Claire and Avery have a standing Sunday evening call, a time both protect as sacred. Claire has embraced texting, sending brief messages throughout the week, rather than expecting lengthy calls. Avery makes a point of sharing more of her daily life in these exchanges, recognizing her mother's need for inclusion. Nathan has stepped back from his mediator role, allowing mother and daughter to navigate their relationship directly. Zach remains closely connected to both, but without the burden of comparison that once complicated family dynamics. Most importantly, both generations have developed greater fluency in expressing their needs without triggering defensive reactions. The transformation hasn't eliminated all challenges. Claire still occasionally slips into old patterns of criticism, and Avery sometimes maintains excessive distance when stressed. But they now recognize these reactions as patterns rather than truths about each other, allowing them to recover more quickly when tensions arise. During our final check-in, Claire shared a profound insight. I realized I was holding on to an image of what mother-daughter relationships should look like, based on my experience with my own mother. When I let go of that picture, I could see the relationship we actually have, which has its own beauty. Avery, too, had shifted her perspective. I've stopped seeing Mom's needs as something that takes away from my life and started seeing our relationship as something that adds to it. That changes everything about how I respond to her. This journey illustrates what's possible when both generations approach their relationship with consciousness, rather than simply reacting from emotional triggers. The specific patterns we've explored, from communication differences to unresolved trauma, from competing life demands to differing memories, exist in countless families. What determines the quality of connection isn't whether these patterns exist, but whether we can recognize and transcend them. What about you? As you reflect on your relationship with your adult children or with your aging parents, which of these patterns resonate with your experience? Perhaps you recognized yourself in Claire's desire for more connection or in Avery's struggle to balance competing demands. Maybe you saw your own family's dynamics in how differing memories create misunderstanding, or how practical considerations about care and resources complicate emotional bonds. The question isn't whether these patterns exist in your family. They likely do in some form, but what you might do differently, knowing they exist. How might you approach your next conversation with an adult child if you recognize their boundaries not as rejection, but as necessary self-care in a complex life? How might you respond to an aging parent's requests if you understood them as attempts to maintain relevance and connection rather than control? Small shifts in understanding can transform these essential relationships. Consider starting with curiosity rather than judgment the next time tension arises. Ask questions that invite deeper understanding. Can you help me understand what makes this difficult for you? Or what would make this work better for both of us? These questions open pathways to connection that remain closed when we simply react from our immediate emotional responses. Remember that what matters most in these relationships isn't perfect harmony, but genuine understanding. The willingness to see each other as full, complex human beings, navigating different life stages with different challenges and needs. This recognition of each other's full humanity is itself a profound form of love. The later years offer a unique opportunity to heal old wounds, create new forms of connection, and experience the deep satisfaction of relationships that have evolved beyond old patterns into conscious, chosen bonds. This journey isn't always easy, but it offers rewards that enrich both generations immeasurably. As you move forward in your own family relationships, I hope the patterns we've explored provide useful lenses for understanding tensions when they arise. May you find your own path toward greater connection across generations, one that honors both your needs and the needs of those you love. If you found value in these insights and stories, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more wisdom on navigating life's later chapters with dignity, purpose, and authentic connection.